Hey there fellow creators, Ben here from Cinder Studios, and welcome back to the Space Tutorial video series. In this video we're going to be painting craters and planetary rocky surfaces with acrylic paint. Stick around. Okay, so if you're joining me from the previous tutorial, which I hope you are, if not, check out the first one where we did the initial black layer, the star field, as well as this awesome nebula. Link to that is in the description box below if you're not watching within the playlist. But for today, we're doing craters. So to do craters, you have to have a planet, of course. So when I get started on this, I normally, for at least my own work, I will lay down a quick sketch of where I want this planet in paint marker. If you don't have paint marker, that's fine. Simple white pastel pencil or white charcoal will work just fine. And honestly, easier to rub off and fix mistakes if you are a little less confident. Now, for this, I'm just going to toss in just an arc here. I'm going to come down a little bit of a edge of the planet. I'm using mostly my elbow here to arc my hand. Basic 4 joints drawing technique here. And just, nice, about a flow of paint there. So the edge of the top of a planet, right about like that. If you're working on a much either smaller or sometimes even, you could say, larger support, using your whole shoulder for that arc, as well as just finding something round to use as a circle template, works just fine as well. Now for colors here, I'm looking for something that is relatively gray. So I'm actually going to go ahead and mix a gray, and we're going to jump back and forth with that. General tools here, you're going to see me using my palette or painting knife as we go. Brush-wise, I've got 3 brushes out. I've got 2 of my Winsor & Newton Cotman. These are actually watercolor brushes, but I use them for acrylic all the time. They're super versatile, so I love using them for that. I think there's just 2 small flats, which are going to be used for the bulk of the painting here. I also have my liner brush, which is going to be good for fleshing out some of the more detailed areas. I will note that this tutorial is easier, but still not quite, I would say, a beginner level. If you're unfamiliar with a lot of more traditional painting techniques, this will seem a little bit, probably a little more advanced for you. But I do hope you guys can give it a try. So as always, I'm going to go ahead and slide this over, bring in my glass palette as I've been using previously. Now, if you guys are coming in right from the previous tutorial, as I mentioned before, we did the nebula. I already have some of this color laid out on this other palette. So I have my titanium white, I have some cad yellow medium, I have some Prussian blue hue, my Mars black, and this is actually some GAC 100, although we're actually going to be switching to using some glazing liquid for the duration of this tutorial. Now I'm going to transfer some of those colors over, and I'm going to add the addition of some cad red medium to this. Now I do want to reflect the color of the nebula in the color of the planet, but I also want to create sort of a nice base gray color to work from. If you're doing any kind of craters, planetary things in space like this, I find it really easy to pick sort of one main color and just work back and forth with your lights and your dark values from there. If you want to add color later, that's always a good thing to do, but I would say it's easier to do that with a glaze once you establish your values. Now, normally for my own work, I will use my mixed used paint jar for this. We're not going to do this today because I'm going to venture to guess that you guys probably don't have one of these lying around. This is a nice base gray color to start with, but I'm going to go ahead and just mix up a base gray rather than grabbing from there to show you guys just how easy it is to mix all of those together. We're pretty much just going to be mixing our primaries, adding a little black and white, and creating a nice nasty gray color to work from. Okay, so I'm going to start things out just by transferring this color to my other palette. No need to waste paint if you don't have to. I'm going to add in there too. I'll grab a little of that red. We just focused on, the blue and the yellow. We'd end up with something that's way more of a green. Not really what I'm looking for here. Do want to even that out with the red. So it's going to be a little bit more of a brown. Just leaning a little green here. Use a bit more red. a little better. Bring in the black. It seems I need a little more black than what I've got, actually. That's probably too much, but it's fine. We still need some of it for overall value work. Okay, that does lean a little bit browner than I was thinking, but I think that should be good. You definitely want enough of a color, and not to really kind of be stingy with it. So yeah, that works out to be a nice brownish gray. Leans, yeah, definitely leans browner, but suppose that means there's more natural dirt in our planet. Okay, so that's going to be the vast majority of what we're working with today. Okay, I'll grab the glazing liquid a little bit later. We're not going to need it immediately. But it is always nice to have a bit of extra room on your palette once you get that far. Okay, to start things out, as usual, brush, bucket of water. I will be dipping periodically. So you see my hand kind of come up to the right. That's what's going on. I'm grabbing water. I'm just going to go ahead and grab my rag as well off to this side. Get your bristles nice and wet. Go into that paint and start working on just the base shape of that planet. So I'm just going to lay this color down nice and even. When you think about composition and placement of your objects, it's nice to think, oh, if I made a mistake in that corner, put a planet there or something there. Maybe a bigger star, who knows. Because I'm using a slightly smoother texture canvas than I normally would for a lot of my personal space work, this color is going to flow and spread a lot easier on this than it might on a more rougher canvas. I always paint my edges. That is a personal preference. You do not have to do that yourself. Now I'm coming right up to that line and just painting where that line is. I'm not going beyond it because that line is my solid arc for that. If you need help steadying your hand, I always do. My hands are hella shaky. So I'm just going to steady my wrist with my, and usually using my left hand support towards the base of my thumb and up towards my wrist here as just to steady that. One thing that's a good technique if you're struggling to sort of paint lines or even draw lines in any way, you can always come in and out of that shape. A lot of people want to just continue right where that is. Always start with where you already were and look to where you're painting. Don't focus. When I'm painting, in this case, something that I'm really worried about where this line is, I'm not looking where my brush is. I'm looking where my brush is going. That way I'm able to have a better understanding of where I need to go next and how I need to manipulate my hand. I don't need to manipulate my hand right where I'm painting. I need to manipulate it where I'm going. And come this way, angle it a little. So I'm starting further in where I've already painted, and just hoping you guys can see that. My hand might be blocking that. I apologize. Just pulling it in and down. About like that. Okay. So we have our base. Simple. Now, with any kind of landscape, cityscape, painting in general, it's important to have a light source, or at least have an idea where your light source is. Now, there's no clear light source in this painting currently. But given the composition, I would think that the light source is probably off off our frame coming down maybe from the upper right. So I'm going to use that as my general idea of where the light is. Of course, we're in the middle of space, so light's a mixed bag, looking at a star somewhere in this system where this planet happens to be, but, you know. So from here, I'm actually going to go ahead and switch to the smaller flat brush because I need a little more control, and this is a much smaller canvas, so having that extra bit of that wide brush is not going to do me as much good. So for making craters, I'm actually going to go ahead and push this canvas up for a second and show you just on the cardboard backing here with my paint marker. So we're looking for ellipses. Now, one thing you can do is let this initial light layer dry completely. Do save your paint, though you're going to need it. And come back in with, again, your pencil or paint marker as a little later once that's dry. For this, though, we're just going to keep working as we go. And if I took the paint marker to the canvas now, I'd get all that brown in this nib, and I don't want to do that. Anyway, so we're looking just for ellipses to start. So just simple little shapes. Again, using your 4 joints, elbow and shoulder primarily, to get all these little circular shapes like so. And that's all we're going to do just right here. And with a brush. So I'm going to thin my paint a little. Not grabbing the glazing liquid yet, but almost. So I'm going to get some of that dark and a little bit of white, just so it's a tonal difference from where the rest of the planet is and everything like that. You want to be able to see it if you use the same color. Obviously, it's going to blend right in. I'm going to just do a couple of little ellipses right in here. Doesn't have to be much, just enough for you to know where they are. Be sure you're paying attention to perspective. Further back towards that horizon you go. You're not going to see as much. Think, basic foreshortening rules. Ellipses will be tighter, closer to the viewer. They're going to be wider. You're going to be able to see more of that shape. In which case, it should be a little wider there. Put a small one in there as well. Okay. So nice, simple, little basic things. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our glazing liquid. Just a little. Don't need a ton. I'm actually going to go ahead and sit down. I've actually been standing for the bulk of this because I do really want to concentrate on this a little bit more. And for this, I do need a little bit more. Again, it's control. When I'm standing, I have a much looser hand. When I'm sitting, I can do a little bit more detail work. I have to slide this over just a little and tilt that to the side. Just my own preferences here, just trying to make things easier on myself. Okay, so again, going to that base color, gonna start adding some glazing liquid to that. Now, glazing liquid will thin your color. It will make your color more transparent. It'll also add a slightly more drying time here, so it won't. Your acrylics will take a little less time to dry, or a little more time to dry, rather. Excuse me. This added flexibility and extended working time is really good, especially for any kind of painting where you want a little more freedom, a little more relaxation in what you're doing. So for this, I know it's really clear for you, but I've got a hell of a glare going on right now. Slowly adding some of that white in. And for craters, it's going to be whatever captures the light. So usually it's going to be like the rim of the crater, in the back of it, as well as on the front edge. So just thinking about, again, circles. Circles, ellipses. Such a I'm going to be probably using the liner brush more than anything else today. Sticks up. Just going to start defining those shapes. And I take, for the edges, I just kind of pull down a little bit. I think of craters a little bit like a stump, just like a hollow stump. So circle that kind of tapers down on either side. And again, we're not changing the base color a ton here, just enough to start blending that color down and in. Now, as you work, you can start to kind of put in other shapes. That's why I love flat brushes, because you can just kind of wiggle it back and forth and get all these really interesting shapes into your pieces. Okay. Now, one of the easiest things to do from here on out is to, one, switch to the liner brush, at least to start out. You'll see me kind of go back and forth between the two, because I definitely need a brush to pull that paint out. So I'm going to go liner, mostly black at this point, mixed with some of that initial color, but we do want it to be primarily black here, a bit of that liquid. So this way, I'm just going to start, and essentially this is what I call paint sketching using my liner brush. So the center of the crater will be dark. So and you want to push that contrast. So right where it meets that lip for the outer, the outer highlight for that crater, it's usually where I start putting that black in. For that dark inner part of the crater that light just does not reach. Start with a line there. And then kind of think about it like a bowl or a stump or something like that. Just pull those lines up and around, like so. Very, very subtle here. Again, to show this on a larger scale, I'll grab a pencil here. So center circle, down the edge like a stump, and I'm darkening the center area right here. And then in sort of that circular pattern, like so. That's all I'm doing here. Just a little smaller scale on this piece. Now, towards the end of this tutorial series, I will be doing this on a much larger scale. So if you're having trouble seeing this, look forward to the bigger painting that I'll be doing these craters with later on. Establish that center. Figure out where that crater is. Start dropping that in. It's actually a little too thin here. Then, of course, obviously, with the ones in the back, you're not going to see as many of those lines I'm putting in here. Probably just be a tiny little edge where that is. Now, another place you're going to see darks, in addition to the center, is sort of the back edge of this. So the outer edge. So if this is the time where the glazing liquid in your other brush is going to come in handy. So I'll put some lines there. And then dry that brush off and just pull that paint out. And if you used any of the glazing liquid before, which is good, when you pull this out, it's going to blend out very nice and easily that way. A couple lines to show that, again, that outer stump-like area. But you don't want it to be as defined. Just going to blend it back out. Back and forth with these brushes. Use a little bit less color and looser lines the further back you go. Like so. Okay, now, if you put any other shapes in, you can also take this opportunity to create some sort of valleys and other areas with your angles and edges. Think about basic triangle shapes. There's that gridded out perspective, block shapes. This is the exact same thing, except you're just coming up, making an angle. Light's coming from this side, shadow appropriately. Find out where that edge is and blend it back out. And of course, the larger of a piece you're working on, you can amp this up scale-wise, really do some crazy stuff with where the placement a lot of these lines are and how much you're blending out. Obviously, we're working very small scale here, so the need to do a lot of that heavier detail just isn't here. Okay, similar thing, still sticking with the liner brush, glazing liquid, some of our initial base color, but white this time. And now we can do those highlighty areas. So think again, where we put those initial lines, that upper edge, right, where that white and black meet, and then a little bit on the back side. Don't go crazy. Just a little bit of hints and indications of where that light is hitting this. And because we're using the base gray and the glazing liquid, if you make a mistake, you can just blend it right back out. And that's the joy of doing these craters, because again, if you mess up, just grab some of that color, block it back out, and you're fine. You're not worrying about having to remix the same color over and over again. The piles are there. You've got more than enough to work with. I'm actually a little bit brighter here than I probably should be. I'm actually just going to pull that around a little bit with the brush that I've got. Dry brush it back out a little. Whoa, okay, so there's a nice mistake. I'll just come right back in, that initial middle color. Getting a little excited here. My hands are shaking a bit this morning. Still a little too much paint on this brush. The same way I was moving those lines, with the center bowl, doing the same thing with the white, but just not taking it down as far. I want to really give that indication that's sort of fading into the center. Edge. Not like that. And you can always go back and forth. I'm finding that it's actually a little bit too bright now, so I'll go back into the black. Rework some of those lines. I want it to be a little darker on the center, maybe darker to this side. So I put white here, but if my light source is coming up this way, then that actually should be dark on this side. And blend it back out accordingly. Out like that. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit further for you guys. You guys are seeing what I'm doing here with the white and the black, so I shouldn't have to keep showing that. But I do want to give you guys a bit closer look at what I'm doing here. Tone down that white a little bit from where I was before. More glazing liquid in that stroke. I'm being really, taking my time here, really slow here, just slowly building this up. A little dark on that side. Anytime I get to that end point, I just want to blend that back down and out, and I can do that. Again, we put those black lines in for the areas where it's like maybe the edge of a cliff or something, so, light on that edge and blend it back out. Contrast is really important, especially I would say for space objects in particular, because you really never know. You have a little bit of freedom because our knowledge of a lot of this stuff is sometimes a little bit more minimal, but you can play around with things a bit more than you might otherwise be able to with a more traditional subject matter. I'm not doing much to this one in the back. It's pretty far back there. Now, I know what you're probably going to ask. If I was doing this on a much larger scale, say a 16 by 20 canvas, would I still be using the liner brush? Yes, but I would probably be blending out with my flat a lot more. Just because you scale it up does not mean you use a much larger brush. And you can. A lot of times I will be using something like a larger flat brush and just using that edge like a liner brush. But I always grab my liner, especially for doing stuff like this. But just to show you that, since we're getting closer to this one in the front, so I will show you guys how to do this without the liner. Just finish this one up a bit. Okay. So this one is a little bit larger. I think it's the largest crater of the set here. There's 5 of them. Yeah. So, same color I was using before. I'm just going to load that up on this flat brush. I will have to grab actually the other one. It's sitting in my water. Because if I need to blend it out, I need to have another brush for that. Let me dry that off. Okay. So, good flat brush, something that's newer. Something you can get to that nice crisp point. That's why I use the watercolor brushes, because when you thin out the paint, you can get that nice crisp edge. Okay. So, just back and forth with it. I don't want to push, I don't want to twist it, because then it'll break that point. Paint. It is again, it's a little more challenging, but possible, absolutely. Sometimes I'll even turn it, just use the corner. And it will kind of, because I have a little less control, I'm going to be using, again, blending that out, going back and forth with it a little bit more. And utilizing the corner and the texture of the canvas and everything. Don't be afraid to just kind of drag your brush along the canvas too. The medium texture, or even a medium smooth texture like this canvas is, will do a lot of the work for you. Actually have a little bit too much light here from my initial sketch layer in, but that's okay. We kept all that original color we had before, so we can just come right back in and hide that. Back to that white for a second and get some of these other areas highlighted out. Into the black for the shadow areas back behind it. Like so. And that's really all it takes to make some little planetary craters. Again, think about foreshortening and perspective, all of those are very important. But in general, you know, start with it's a bowl on a stump is the best way I can really describe that. At this point, I'm actually just going to add some extra shadows in here. Go into almost into the pure black, really. Thinking about where that sun is, where this craters might be casting some shadows. Yeah, right about like that. So this concludes part 2 of the Space Objects tutorial. If you've been watching since the beginning, thanks guys for checking this out. Now this was really fun doing these craters, but what about like actual planets themselves? planets from a distance. Well, that's what we're going to be covering in part 3. But I hope this guide for you guys has been a nice introduction to these space objects. The next couple tutorials are going to be a little bit more advanced even than this, but they are really fun, and with enough practice, I'm sure you guys can find them to be relatively easy as well. So, thanks guys for checking this one out. I will see you guys in part 3. Keep on creating. This has been from Cinder Studios, and I will see you guys next time.